News for today. It's Thursday, June 15th. And after 8.5 hours in the car today, we are finally back to my parents' house in West Virginia. And we'll be back in our home, our camper, in just 2 days. I can't wait. And then I'll be doing these from our mobile Hawkins house next week. All right, so there's a breathing treatment going on in the background, and kids are still awake. So I'm just going to just warn you now. There's a couple of stories that we need to get to that today that caught my eye that I think you're going to be interested. The first one is, I know it's a shock, but there are pro-life people who walk among us, and they take out ads on Google with their money given to them by other pro-life people. So the Guardian article came out today basically criticizing Google for taking money, because that's the thing that it does. It takes money to business, for taking money from pro-life groups to run ads on Google to support pregnant and parenting women and families, to give out free diapers, free baby formula, maternity clothes, counseling, free pregnancy tests, sometimes STD tests, STD treatment. Yeah, they're upset about that. And so the Guardian has written an expose of a huge study that found that Google has made more than $10 million from pregnancy centers since Roe was reversed last June. Not a surprise, but I think what's surprising is the sentiment behind this article, which is that the Guardian and these authors here, the left, doesn't believe that pro-life people should have the right to use their money to take out ads advertising free services for pregnant and parenting families. And I think that's, once again, when we're talking about how to create a culture of life and supporting women and families in need, everyone always says that pro-life people need to do more to support women and families in need, but yet pregnancy centers, the more than 3,000 pregnancy centers, maternity homes across the country are already doing those things. And guess what? They get criticized for actually advertising things that they're doing. It's unbelievable. But so I don't know why they're shocked, but that's where we're at. All right, next article I want to highlight. This actually was an interesting article. Senator Brian Hughes sent to me last night. He's a Texas senator. He was spearheaded this effort. So you remember how I've been talking about my fear and some of the cases we've started seeing of women who've been high risk pregnancy situations where they could no longer be pregnant, so they needed to do emergency C-section, deliver the baby to treat the mother, to save the mother's life. And how in the pro-life movement, when we introduce laws to prevent all abortions in the state, there's always an exception that says that this does not mean you can't medically intervene to save the life of mother. We wouldn't call those interventions abortions because the intent is different, right? In a direct abortion, the intent is to stop a beating heart of a human being, and if you fail to stop the beating heart of a human being, you have failed in your job. When you're talking about life-threatening circumstance, the goal is to keep heartbeats going, right, and make sure they don't stop. But what we've seen over the course of the past couple months, and we've certainly seen this in news articles. I was questioned about Meet the Press. I talked about that earlier this week when I was in D.C. on Monday. Was there's been these articles of women saying, I had this situation happen, and the doctors wouldn't treat me. And what we've been saying is, it's been very clear in the pro-life movement, this is just simply malpractice. And I think that we have some medical professionals who are also abortion advocates who are mad that they reside in red states. They're mad that the state legislature, who's passed pro-life prevention, abortion prevention acts, pro-life laws. And so their response is, we're just not going to deal with it. You have to go somewhere else. And sadly, I think the left is really looking for a terrible situation, a tragedy to occur, to use that tragedy to exploit it, to call for Roe versus Wade 2.0 and abortions to be legalized up until the moment of birth. And that's what they did in Ireland, and that's they used one case of a tragedy of a woman who died while pregnant to, throughout the country, legalize the deaths of what will end up being millions of children. So in Texas, which no abortions are legal. Now, chemical abortions are still flowing in on their borders, just like illegal immigrants every day, because of the mail, because of the weaponized Biden administration that's basically saying you can deliver drugs in the mail that can kill women because they're chemical abortion pills or whatever. But Texas has laws in the book saying you can't be committing abortions in our state. So Democrats and Republicans in Texas got together, and what they did was they unanimously passed a clarification, and the governor's already signed it, Governor Abbott's already signed it in, that simply says if a woman is enduring a life-threatening condition known as PROM, preventable premature rupture of the membranes, it's when a woman's water breaks before the child can survive outside of the womb, viability, that medical intervention can be done that may result in the termination of the life within her, that may end the life of the child within her, and that doesn't violate the pro-life laws. Now, what's interesting, Republicans who had passed these pro-life bills said, like, this isn't, this clarification isn't necessary because we already have an exception in our pro-life laws that states you can treat a mother who's enduring a life-threatening situation. But they said that some doctors and hospitals were, quote, overcorrecting in their interpretation of the law, and women were being harmed in the state of Texas. This is some bipartisanship I could really get behind. And it was interesting. Save this for your pro-choice friends. So the Pro-Abortion Center for Reproductive Rights filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas, right, because of their abortion laws, because the Center for Reproductive Rights wants all abortions, right? However, in their lawsuit, this is what they actually had to claim before the court. Quote, their exception does not require that any of the risks to the pregnant person be imminent. End quote. End quote. Physicians are over-complying with the laws to the detriment of their patients' lives. End quote. That's from a pro-choice, very pro-abortion group that, saying that the exceptions do not mean that a woman's life has to be infinitely at risk. Her life has to be risked, but she doesn't have to be like seconds away from dying before you intervene. Even pro-choice groups knew that exception was already in the law. But yet these doctors were over complying, as the words of the Center for Reproductive Rights said. So interesting story. But I hope this will help some women in the state of Texas. But more importantly, I hope it will actually send signal throughout the country to some of these activists, hospitals, and physicians who aren't treating other women across the country that, look, we're paying attention to this and we care about this. This is why Students for Life, we've set up a new website, pregnancy-emergency.com, where a woman who's experiencing what could be a life-threatening pregnancy situation can call us and get connected to a third party who can connect her to the medical help she deserves, to know that's even available for her. All right, next article I want to talk about is a pro-life poll. Our good friend Dr. Michael Newey's professor at Catholic University of America. He wrote in National Review today about a new Gallup poll. They do an annual values and beliefs survey. And he always is like the first person, anytime there's any poll on abortion, to get the response out. So some good news. It now says that 51% of Americans identify as pro-life, which is actually huge because we always know that the identifying terms pro-life and pro-choice are confusing for a majority of Americans. So like when we poll young people, there's actually more people who are against abortion than there are people who say they're pro-life, because there's challenges with the terms and then there's branding problems. So it's up, that 41% is actually up 4 points from last year's Gallup poll. The percentage of Americans who felt abortion was morally wrong actually increased once again from 38% last year to 41% this year. So I think that was really good. The results indicate that 55% of Americans generally think abortion should be illegal in the second trimester. 70% think it should be illegal in the third trimester. Majority felt it should be illegal in the first trimester. And that actually increased 2 points from last year. Overall, this is pretty good news, especially since when you look at all that's happened in social media and in the media since the Dobbs decision last year. I think this is actually really good because it has been, a full court press to confuse Americans about what our abortion laws are, what Roe versus Wade was, what Roe versus Wade did. And like I said, you even had situations where abortion activists have been trying to use tragic circumstances, life-threatening circumstances of pregnant women to somehow justify all abortions and play off of people's emotions that way. So this is actually pretty good news for us. And Gallup isn't really like a pro-life polling group anyway, so I don't even know how the questions were worded. I don't know if they were actually without bias, if people fully understood what was going on, but still pretty good news. Last article I'll bring up to you today was a letter that was published in the National Review by myself, Lila Rose, Sean Carney, a bunch of leaders within the pro-life movement. And I think this is really important. It's called the North Star, following North Star, and realizing that in the 14th Amendment, the men who wrote the 14th Amendment and the states, when the states ratified the 14th Amendment, which is really important when we talk, and we often hear about the 14th Amendment. That was the amendment after the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment ended slavery. 14th Amendment said Black men had equal rights. But what's interesting is it wasn't just for Black persons. When you look at how they wrote it, they talked about citizens, but they also talked about persons. And we know in Section 1 of the 14th Amendment that the preborn should be considered persons. And under the 14th Amendment, they should have equal protection under the law. They deserve equal protection under the law. And it's actually pretty simple. All we need is Congress to acknowledge that the 14th Amendment applies to preborn human beings. And when you look at, I know I just did a Facebook Live, I think last week, with Josh Craddock, a Students for Life law alumni. He was an editor at Harvard, one of the Harvard Law Review magazines, brilliant lawyer. And I kind of grilled Josh on the 14th Amendment, what it meant, how does it apply? And one of the questions I asked Josh in that interview was, well, how do we know the men who wrote the 14th Amendment, thought that the preborn were persons? And you actually could look at the time period that amendment was ratified, where states were also they were actually passing other laws against abortion, recognizing the preborn as persons. They may not be citizens, but they're definitely persons. And that was widely recognized throughout that 1860s time period, 1870s time period, when the 14th Amendment was, written, introduced, passed, and, finally added to our Constitution. So I really encourage you, go to National Review, check out this article. Our friends at Live Action took the lead in writing it, and it's a brilliant article showing just exactly where the pro-life movement must go. And some of the things that we talked about was, one, acknowledging constitutional provisions and legislation that children have legal and constitutional personhood, ensuring fetal homicide, wrongful death, and child endangerment laws are vigorously enforced to protect all preborn children, not just in some states. In some states, there's fetal homicide laws that, if to kill a pregnant woman is it considered a double homicide. Other states, it's not. We talked about extending the state and federal child tax credit to include preborn persons, because obviously we know the preborn child is alive, so everything should be, all of our laws should be consistent, clarifying that embryos who are in cryopreservation, who are frozen, are not legal property of someone else that can be simply discarded for mere convenience, making support for equal protection a litmus test for elected officials. Anyone who's running for any level of government should at least be able to say, yes, the preborn should get equal protection, ensuring the child in the womb gets due process and legal representation through judicial proceedings, passing robust and enforcing existing prenatal child support laws. So we were pretty comprehensive in this letter. I encourage you to check it out and read it. I'm sure you'll love it and agree with it, and pass it on to your pro-choice friends. I think a lot of your pro-choice friends might actually be interested in reading all that we really believe in the pro-life movement, not really just to believe the hype of what the abortion lobby says we are. But